Hello and welcome to English II. I'm your online teacher, Miss Abear. We have been working with Dr. King's letter from Birmingham Jail, and we are looking specifically at how writers or how authors use rhetoric and word choices to develop their ideas and their claims. This particular unit is part of an Engaged New York curriculum, and this is Unit 7 for me, The Cup of Endurance Runs Over. Today we are going to be continuing in paragraphs 6 through 9, except we're looking more specifically at the rhetoric in paragraphs 6 through 9. So get your text out and get your homework out, and let's get ready to start our day. Before we get into our agenda, I want to remind you of our end of the unit task. So you will be relying on all of your reading and analysis, as well as all of the tools that you put together during this unit, and you will be writing a well-developed response to the prompt. Analyze how King develops and refines his claims to advance his purpose. And all of the things that we're doing, all of the writings, all of the tools that we're using are going to prepare you for this end of the unit task. Our agenda today, you will see as I just introduced our agenda, we are going to be accountable for our homework. We're going to do some reading and discussion. We're going to do a quick write, and then I'll give you your homework. You'll notice here that there is not a masterful reading today. Why is that? That is because we are still working with paragraphs 6 through 9 that we worked with the last time that we were together. So we don't need to read that, or we don't need to hear that again. So without further ado, let's continue. So for your homework accountability, I want you with your partner to read and discuss your objective summaries of paragraphs 1 through 9. Good job. I heard some of your summaries as I was walking around, and some of you put a little analysis in there. Let's be careful that we're only using the facts from the text itself to write those objective summaries. Some of your summaries were really long, and some of them were really short. As long as you have King's central claim and the evidence that he provides, then you should be okay, but your teacher in your room, in your classroom, will guide you through what that should look like. One of the things, a tool that you're going to be introduced today is called the Rhetorical Impact Tracking Tool. You remember I told you guys that there is a packet for every unit or for every lesson that we're doing, and this packet is available in the YouTube description. This Rhetorical Impact Tracking Tool is in that packet. Your teacher probably needs to make several copies of this, because it will pop up in future lessons, and as it pops up, the subsequent lessons do not include it in their packets. So you need to have several copies on hand, and I would probably go ahead and each student probably needs to have at least 3 or 4 or even 5 copies of it as they are tracking the rhetoric in this letter. So let's look at what is rhetoric. Rhetoric is specific techniques that writers or speakers use to create meaning in a text, enhance a text or speech, and in particular, persuade readers or listeners. Most people are familiar with the ethos, pathos, and logos, and you might want to write these things down, just kind of a hint there. Ethos appeals to the credibility of a character or a speaker or a writer to persuade an audience. They're telling why they are credible, okay? Pathos appeals to the audience's emotion in order to persuade them. And logos appeals to the logic of an audience. How logical are the facts that are presented? So that's one kind of piece of rhetoric. Another piece of rhetoric is figurative language. So you think about alliteration, you think about metaphor, hyperbole, symbolism, satire, and imagery, allusion. There are so many different pieces of figurative language that writers use to help create meaning beyond the literal meaning of specific words. And last but not least, and it's really not even last, there are so many different pieces and parts of rhetoric that you will learn throughout your life. But one of the ones that we're going to use during this unit are the use of rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions are asked for effect, not necessarily intended for anyone to answer. They're meant to challenge the listener, to raise doubt, and to help emphasize ideas. You're going to see a lot of these in Dr. King's letter. You're also going to see additional pieces of rhetoric that you will probably pick up on yourself. But that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of discussions with each other during this time as we are reading and discussing. That allows you to see things from someone else's perspective, because somebody else is going to pick up, your neighbor or someone else in your classroom may pick up on a piece of rhetoric that you didn't pick up on. And so having these collaborative discussions helps kind of a collective whole in this information that you guys need to put together in order to write an effective essay. So let's move ahead and let's look at our reading and discussion. With a small group, or you can even do a partner, I need you to reread paragraph 6 and answer the questions on your board. What is the purpose of the paragraph, and what verb does King use to describe the effect of racial injustice on the community in Birmingham, as well as what impact or feeling does that specific word choice create or evoke? Good job. Let's review the answers to those, or some answers that will work. You may have some additional responses that you want to keep up with. But the purpose of paragraph 6 is to demonstrate why the time for direct action has come. And then when you look at the verb that he uses the word engulfs the community. Guys, that word engulf creates the imagery that racial injustice overwhelms or destroys the community. The word engulfs creates this imagery of racial injustice is widespread and dangerous problem. It also mirrors phrases like engulfed in flames. Typically, when you read the word engulfs, it evokes those emotions that make you think of fire and how fire consumes something. So as King is describing the injustices by using the word engulfs, and you know in your mind and in your body that you just feel that overwhelming sense of dread that something is widespread and it's just going to destroy everything that it touches. And so that is that emotion that we are kind of evoking. Now, I want you to get this rhetorical tool, impact tracking tool, and I want you to write that down. I want you to write down and track that rhetoric that we just talked about. The answers are on your board in front of you, and so you will also see how we filled that out to start this rhetorical impact tracking. Good job. You guys have written that down. You are going to be responsible for keeping up with this on your own. Sometimes I'm going to remind you, but sometimes I'm not. You're going to be writing things down that I'm not going to be telling you, and that is going to fall on you and your responsibility. Teachers, in the Canvas course that will accompany this later, you will have the answers, or you will have a model of this rhetorical analysis tool so that you can compare to make sure that your students are getting exactly what it is that they need, and you can help them kind of filter through that process, and you can differentiate as you need to. So let's move along and let's look at some additional questions that will help push you towards that analysis of the rhetoric. So I want you to go back to your small group, again refer back to paragraph 6 and answer the questions that are on your board. Good job, okay? So there was some great discussion. Let's talk about some of the things that I heard and some things that you can put on your rhetorical tracking tool. So what examples does King use to describe the way African Americans are treated in Birmingham in paragraph 6? He expresses how racial injustice engulfs the community with its ugly record of police brutality, its unjust treatment of Negroes, and its unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches. I need to draw your attention to something really quick, okay? You see the word "the community"? The word "the" is in brackets. The word "the" does not appear in the text, but in order to make this a logical sentence, we needed to put that word in there. So when you are using a quote and it's either missing a word or you need a word in there to make the sentence function as a sentence, then you use brackets to include whatever word or phrase that needs to go in somewhere in that quote. And the person who's looking at that knows that if it's in brackets, it's not in the original text. So just a piece of punctuation help for you. Let's look at the next question that was on the board. How does King's use of rhetoric in paragraph 6 advance his purpose in that paragraph? So King uses figurative language, engulfs ugly brutality, unsolved bombings, to create vivid images that evoke fear, injustice, and inescapability, and to show that King and his affiliates have completed the first step of the nonviolent campaign, that collection of the facts to determine whether injustices are alive. Guys, that is really important that you understand that, that King and his affiliates have completed those steps. Again, some more rhetoric that advances his purpose. He uses the alliteration, its ugly record of police brutality, its unjust treatment of Negroes, and its unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches to create a rhythm in the text. It strengthens the persuasiveness of his explanation that the city fathers have refused to engage in good faith negotiation, because if they had, these injustices would not still be present in Birmingham. So make sure that you've written that information down in your rhetorical impact tracking tool. If your teacher needs to back the video up to pause on that slide, they can, so that you make sure that everyone has that information in their rhetorical impact tracking tool. Now let's move on to paragraphs 7 and 8. With a partner, and it can be the same partner or a new one, reread paragraphs 7 and 8 and answer the questions that are on your board. Good job. All right, let's talk about some of the responses that I heard. So how does King describe the Alabama Christian movement for human rights reaction to the merchant's broken promise? They were confronted with blasted hopes, and the dark shadow of a deep disappointment settled upon them. All right. How does King use rhetoric in the sentence to advance his purpose that he established in paragraph 6? King uses figurative language, the images of blasted hope and the dark shadow of disappointment, to show how destructive are the broken promises and therefore how necessary is the direct action campaign. All right, the last question for this particular slide is, how does King describe direct action in paragraph 7? King describes direct action as a process whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. Whew, that's pretty powerful. That is very, very powerful, laying your bodies down. And if you're familiar with some of the protests that were being held in Birmingham, you'll understand just how powerful that statement is and how it affects. And if you're not familiar, ask your teacher in your room or ask your history teacher about that particular statement. Let's look at a couple of more responses before you add information to your rhetorical tracking tool. All right, so what is the effect of King's description of direct action in paragraph 7? So the questions show the specific difficulties those involved in the direct action campaign will face: blows and ordeals of jail. Okay? Because this information is given in a question form, readers can imagine their own answers to the question, could I accept blows without retaliating? Could I endure the ordeals of jail? So those rhetorical questions kind of put in there about that direct action, so that will help the reader understand that. Again, rhetorical questions. How did King and his affiliates prepare for the direct action campaign? They had workshops on nonviolence and repeatedly asked themselves, are you able to accept blows without retaliating? And are you able to endure the ordeals of jail? So they asked themselves those questions, but again, they're asking that of the audience who's reading the letter as well, because it's important that it's not just he and his affiliates, but it is whoever will read the letter, the audience. And who do we know that the intended audience was? That's right, it was those clergymen, right? Well, would those clergymen be able to endure jail and endure blows, right? He needed to make sure that they understood that. All right, let's look at the last question. What effect do the questions in paragraph 7 create? The questions show that the specific difficulties those involved in the direct action campaign will face, blows and ordeals of jail. Again, because this information is given in question form, readers can imagine their own answers to that. So, again, the effect is the same in both of these questions. It just asked it in a different way. Why is this answer and this answer identical? Because the curriculum needs you to understand that when you get ready for your test at the end of the year, that these questions are going to be asked in different ways, and they're just modeling for you how you will see those questions asked in different ways. All right, so now I need you to go back to your rhetorical impact tracking tool and record your information. Good job, okay? Now we're going to move on to paragraph 9. And so I want you independently to do paragraph 9 because I think you can. Reread paragraph 9 and complete the rhetorical impact tool. You may consider the following questions. What word does King repeat throughout paragraph 9? What is the effect of that repetition? And then what image does King use to describe the effect of constructive nonviolent tension, and what's the rhetorical effect of this image? Good job. We are not going to go over the answers to that question again. The teacher in your classroom will have those answers if he or she decides to go over those, or you can have a whole class discussion. That's up to the teacher that's in your classroom currently at this time. So put that information here. Let me give you a minute to make sure you have time to put that information on your rhetorical impact tracking tool. Good job. All right, now you know we're going to write, so I need you to get out a piece of paper and I want you to answer this question. How does King use rhetoric in paragraph 9 to advance his purpose? Go back to your annotations and other tools to find the evidence. Good job. All right, we're going to continue working with paragraph 9 in your homework. So I want you again to reread paragraph 9, and I want you to annotate how many times King uses the word tension, and then consider the different kinds of tension King is describing in paragraph 9. That is all that I have for you today. Until next time, happy learning.